I read Dracula. Like just about every younger millennial woman, I spent my teenage years reading about vampires. But they were that kind of vampire. You know, the ones that don't have fangs and sparkle in the sunlight. Now, Twilight wasn't the only thing that I read as a teenager, not by a long shot, and I wasn't quite as obsessed with it as some people were. But the only kind of vampire books that I read were modern ones, written in primarily the 21st century, with the kind of glamorized, romanticized view of vampires that is so prominent today. So, this October for Halloween, I decided to remedy that. I read Dracula. And I loved it. It was wonderful. It was completely different, of course, from any other vampire story that I had read up until this point. And it was so creepy. It was, oh my goodness. So, Dracula was published in the late 19th century. The author is Bram Stoker, and it was not by any means the first vampire novel. In fact, vampires played a prominent role in Gothic literature throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. But it was without a doubt the most definitive and influential book about vampires for a long, long time. The story follows a man named Jonathan Harker who has been sent to Dracula's castle to negotiate him buying land in England, his fiancée Mina, and her friend Lucy, who mysteriously ends up with bite marks on her neck, and Lucy's three suitors who, spoiler alert, are trying to protect her from Dracula, but are tragically not able to. It's a pretty slow-moving book. It doesn't get going for a long time. It takes forever for them just to acknowledge that Dracula is a vampire, which, as a modern reader knowing from page 1 that Dracula is a vampire, that was a little bit frustrating. But, you know, it's kind of understandable, because Dracula is the reason that we associate everything in Dracula with vampires. Like, you know, aversion to crosses and garlic and not going out during the day, sleeping in a coffin, all of those things. Dracula's what made those things. So, you know, Lucy has strange bite marks on her neck and looks like she's lost a lot of blood. It was a vampire. But they don't know that. Only Dr. Van Helsing knows that. And so it's this really interesting kind of dramatic irony where the reader knows that Dracula's a vampire and what's going on in all of these situations where the people, you know, Jonathan Harker in Dracula's castle, Lucy and her suitors back in England, the people on the ship that Dracula travels on, and so on and so forth, are just clueless. But you, as the 21st century reader, are just like, it's a vampire. I will say, though, I was really impressed with the characters. I found it really easy to connect with them, to feel for them. They felt like real people. They didn't seem like larger-than-life fantasy heroes or anything like that. In fact, I was kind of surprised that there was no one central protagonist. I expected that to be Jonathan Harker because it begins in his point of view, but then it switches back to England when he is still in Transylvania, and it follows various storylines that all kind of just weave together to ultimately form a coherent story. I really loved the friendship between Mina and Lucy. I kind of, at the beginning, was very cautious because I thought, you know, they're going to pit these two women against each other. The one is going to be, you know, the good, virtuous girl, and then the other one. I had seen the spoilers. I knew what happened to Lucy. I thought she was going to be just this horrible, manipulative, backstabbing kind of character or something, but I was really pleasantly surprised. She was just so sweet and sympathetic, and their friendship was just so wholesome, and I wasn't expecting that, so I was very pleased by that. And also by Lucy's suitors, and how they, you know, she can only marry one of them, but they don't even care about that. They don't care, you know, the two that she didn't choose to get married to. They're perfectly happy to protect her anyway. They're not just, you know, they're not at each other's throats. There's no resentment between them. There's no resentment from them towards her, you know. Oh, you don't want to marry me? All right, good luck with Dracula. No, they all kind of rally together to protect her, and even though they fail, I just find that to be so sweet and heartwarming, and, you know, all of the human characters in Dracula just, there's so much to them, and they're ordinary people, like I said, no larger-than-life heroes, but they're such good people despite being very ordinary and despite the fact that none of them on their own can stand against Dracula. One thing that surprised me a little bit was that there were no hard and fast rules for how one becomes a vampire. there were, several kind of implications of, Lucy got bitten multiple times before her death, and then when she died, she became a vampire. And Dr. Van Helsing says that if she had kissed her fiance, then when he died eventually, he would become a vampire. So there's kind of an implication that any kind of close contact with a vampire turns you into one, like being bitten or kissing them or things along those lines. But then there's also what happened to Mina, where it wasn't just, and then when she dies, she would become a vampire, but she was slowly transforming while she was still alive. So I don't really know what to make of that. Obviously, it was because Dracula forced her to drink his blood, but I don't know what to make of that in terms of there are no hard and fast rules, and I want there to be. But, it is what it is, and I'm just used to books where there are more kind of clear rules on what makes one a vampire or not. I did find the ending to be a little bit anticlimactic. There's this whole build up to they're going to have to face off against Dracula, and it's going to be this high stakes thing where, if he's able to disappear, he could just bide his time until they're all dead, and then Mina becomes a vampire, and there's nothing that anybody can do to stop him. But then the actual battle itself did seem to fall a little bit flat. I didn't really like the ending. I liked the ending in that I'm glad that Mina was okay and that they got married and that, Dracula was defeated and whatnot. I wasn't expecting it to be a bad guy wins kind of situation. But I don't know, I just felt like it could have been less anticlimactic. I really liked Mina as a character. I did occasionally have problems with, the guys all being so determined to keep her out of it, to keep her ignorant of what's going on. But, just as a character, she's so cool. She's smart, she's capable, she's got a good head on her shoulders, and despite everything that's going on, even though she has put in probably the most peril of anybody in the story, she's not just a damsel in distress, and she's not just there for the guys to rescue her. They do rescue her, but also she plays a part in that. And I think it would have been so easy for her to just kind of be a one-note side character, but I really liked her, and I really liked her relationship with her fiancé and then husband, Jonathan. They clearly had a lot of respect and love for each other, and were there for each other even in their darkest times, so I really found that to be a compelling story. And I want to add, I don't even read a lot of, spooky or horror type books. That's not my genre. I like fantasy, but I like hopeful fantasy with happy endings, which, this has a happy ending, but it's also a little bit darker and more creepy than what I normally would read. So, I was really pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're into fantasy or paranormal romance or anything supernatural. And if, like me, you jumped on the vampire bandwagon in high school but never really got into older vampire books, just, the 20th or 21st century stuff, go read Dracula. It's fantastic. And it will blow everything else out of the water. It really will. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it and you'd like to see more like this, feel free to subscribe. This video is part of a series I'm doing called Catching Up on the Classics, where I take either books that I read in middle school or high school because I was required to, or classics that I've never read at all, and I read through them and I kind of give you my thoughts on them. What were they about? What did I think? Who would I recommend them for, if anyone? I also do a wide variety of other videos relating to classic literature, reading, writing, literary concepts, college and study tips, and much more.